Welcome to the National Political Debates, brought to you by the Jamaica Debates Commission, in association with Jamaica Public Service Company Limited, changing lives with their energy, and the DNG Foundation, here for Jamaicans, here for Jamaica. Tonight, we focus on finance and the economy. Our moderator is Derek Jones.
Good evening. Welcome to the second of three political debates, organized by the Jamaica Debates Commission and staged before a live studio audience. The debates are intended to assist in identifying, clarifying, and understanding the issues being presented in this general election campaign from the perspective of the respective political parties. This evening's debate focuses on finance and economic issues. As is customary in the production of television debates, the audience is prohibited from applauding the debaters, except for now, when we announce each debater. I have pleasure in introducing for the People's National Party, Dr. Peter Phillips. And I have equal pleasure in introducing for the Jamaica Labour Party, Mr. Audley Shaw. The members of the panel of questioners are Mr. Dwayne Berbick of CVM Television, Mr. Al Edwards of the Jamaica Observer, and Mr. Damian Mitchell of the Gleaner Power 106 News Center. I am your moderator, Derek Jones. The guidelines for tonight's debates have been previously agreed and are posted on the Debate Commission's website at www.jamaicadebatescommission.org. We have people joining us from Trinidad to Tokyo, and I'm going to repeat the website address for you, www.jamaicadebatescommission.org. The guidelines include questions being no longer than 30 seconds, and each debater being allowed 90 seconds to respond to each question, with rebuttals being limited to 45 seconds. The questions posed in tonight's debate are created solely by the panel of journalists and are not influenced by the Jamaica Debates Commission in any way. You can also follow the debates on the Debates Commission's website, and you can send your comments to us on Twitter at our Jamaica Votes Twitter account. Arising from a coin toss earlier, Mr. Audley Shaw of the JLP will make the opening statement, while Dr. Peter Phillips of the PNP will make the final of the two statements at the end of the debate. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the 2-minute opening statement from Mr. Audley Shaw. Mr. Shaw.
Good evening, everyone. Let me first of all thank the Debate Commission and my colleague, Dr. Phillips, for agreeing to this debate. It is a very important debate that takes on even more important proportions, having regard to the statement that has been issued today by the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, Christine Lagarde. 4 years ago, when I became Minister of Finance in Jamaica, the challenges were great. We inherited low growth. We inherited a poverty that averaged 18.5% over the 18-year period of the previous government, high debt, and an economy in crisis. It was then joined by a global crisis, and we have worked through it. We entered into an agreement with the IMF. We had a debt exchange. We had major radical reforms that we have started, not yet completed, including tax reform and reforms to the pension system. But now the economy is stable. We have a stable exchange rate. We have adequate foreign exchange reserves. Inflation is under control. Interest rates are heading down. The economy is growing again. And we are now at a point where we can say that we have stabilized the economy and we are now ready to go for growth. But now comes the statement from the Managing Director of the IMF. And so we have managed the crisis of the inheritance from the PNP. We have managed through the global economic crisis of 2008. And the question that remains at this stage is that clearly the Jamaica Labour Party is the most qualified government to continue to manage the economy of Jamaica.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw, and we now invite Dr. Phillips to have his 2-minute opening statement.
Good evening. I want to thank you all for the opportunity to address you here tonight. It is clear that we have a government that is still in denial. The key issue this evening is how to return the Jamaican economy to growth. For the past 3.5 years, we have had 13 quarters of negative growth. Unemployment grew from just over 9% to close to 13%. Poverty, which was just under 10%, has almost doubled, and some 200,000 Jamaicans entered the ranks of the poor over these last 4 years. And overall, our economy today is 5% smaller than it was in 2007. The JLP says that this is attributable to the global crisis, but that is only part of the answer. The other part is the disastrous economic management that they have offered. Other countries in the Caribbean who have experienced similar circumstances have returned to growth much earlier. Instead, Jamaica, having entered an IMF agreement, has passed only 2 of the 6 scheduled tests. And in every international ranking, we have performed terribly. The World Economic Forum rated Jamaica as the worst macroeconomy, 142 out of 142 countries ranked. The issue we face as a country is how to turn all of this around and return to a path of growth. We intend to put jobs at the center of our economic policy and our concerns.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. We now start the period of questioning, and the first question is from Mr. Dwayne Berbick, who will direct his question to Mr. Audley Shaw. Mr. Berbick.
Mr. Shaw, the Prime Minister has spoken of bitter medicine being required to deal with some of Jamaica's more chronic economic challenges. Expound on 2 or 3 of the austerity measures that Jamaica Labour Party government would pursue if returned to power come next year.
Well, first of all, you can be assured that there are already austerity measures in place because there are fiscal constraints to expenditure and to spending money. We can't find all the money to spend on all of the things that need to be spent on now. But other kinds of challenges that we will face in terms of that so-called bitter medicine will include, for instance, a deliberate decision that has to be made in this country that we must have greater equity in the taxation system. At present, there is an unbelievably high level of tax evasion that takes place in Jamaica. And so the present program of tax reform on which we are diligently embarked is not just reform of policy. Critically, it is also going to be the administrative reform to make sure that even as we look at lowering all of the various types of taxes, income, corporate, border taxes, everything, and general consumption taxes, even as we do that, we are going to have to ramp up the capability to say to those who are earning, whether the corporate profits tax or personal income taxes, and are not reporting it, we are saying there must be greater equity in the system, and to the extent that that is bitter medicine, so be it, there must be greater equity.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Dr. Phillips?
I think the point needs to be made clearly that whatever medicine that is being proposed is going to be more severe than it needed to have been because of the failures of the administration to timely implement their agreements with the IMF. Tax reform, pensions reform, public sector transformation were all left to languish unnecessarily long. And as a consequence of that, we are squandering the opportunity that was afforded by the JDX and which was implemented by the sacrifice of thousands upon thousands of Jamaicans.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. The next question is from Mr. Al Edwards to Dr. Phillips.
Good evening, Dr. Phillips. For decades, the Jamaican economy has exhibited anemic growth. According to the World Economic Outlook published by the IMF last year, Jamaica will have the 7th slowest growth rate in the world up to 2015. Therefore, if your party were to return to office on December the 29th, how does it intend to stimulate growth in ascending order of priority, 3, 2, 1?
Well, first of all, I think it is important that we have a predictable macroeconomic framework. We have expressed the view that we need to have a medium-term agreement with the International Monetary Fund, which will provide this level of predictability. We also believe that the tax reform is very important to this process, and we have to contain our fiscal expenditures quite significantly. In addition, we think there are some other critical agendas. Energy. We need to also engage in a packaging of entities, underperforming entities within the state, and divest them and put them in productive hands. On top of that, we also think that it is very important to identify critical industries, ICT, agro-processing, manufacturing, to name just a few, and our cultural industries, and to provide adequate support, both technical and financial, that would enable these sectors to move forward. And of course, we believe an emergency employment program that will not only help stimulate aggregate demand, but also help restore some measure of social calm is an essential element in all that needs to be done in the immediate period going forward.
In short, Minister, 3, 2, 1?
In short, IMF program, packaging, divestment, stimulating critical industries.
Thank you. Mr. Shaw?
The last time the Jamaican economy grew in any significant increment was during the 1980s and the latter part, when it averaged 6% growth. And it went through in momentum years to the PNP in 1990, where the economy grew in that year by 6.3%. Since that time, the economy has plunged into negative and marginal growth. Under Omar Davis, it grew for 14 years by 0.83% per year, less than 1%. Therefore, the major structural changes that we are embarked on now are critical to making the economy competitive going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. The next question is from Damian Mitchell to Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Shaw, why did you fail to maintain the IMF agreement?
We have not failed to maintain the IMF agreement. Let me indicate, first of all, that there is no fundamental disagreement between the Jamaica Labour Party government, between the government and the International Monetary Fund. We have agreed to the structural benchmarks that I mentioned constantly: tax reform, pension reform, the question of the public sector, not just only the transformation of the public sector, but certainly in dealing with the public sector on developing a comprehensive and predictable method of determining wage settlements going forward. These are the sticking points that have held up the reviews by the IMF. But we have taken a diligent approach to all of them. The consultations with the public sector, critical, and we are achieving very important milestones of consensus with that. Tax reform is in Parliament. The spokesman on finance is there with us on that. We just have a couple of hearings left, then we go to a white paper, and then we roll out elements of the tax reform beginning in April of next year, the new budget. So it is with pension reform. And these are all complex matters. And even if we could not go at the pace dictated by the International Monetary Fund, ultimately, as Minister of Finance, I have that duty to have a pace that is realistic.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Dr. Phillips?
It is not true to say that there is no sticking point with the IMF. The fact of the matter is that only 2 of the scheduled tests were successfully completed. The main problem is the botched negotiations with the public sector workers. The government made an agreement with the IMF and had no discussion with the workers. It caused a crisis. And then at the end, they have committed to unprogrammed expenditures which were not contemplated at all in the program. That's the heart of the problem, in addition to the delays in implementing agreements in relation to tax reform, pension reform, and the like.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. The next question is from Mr. Dwayne Berbick to Dr. Phillips.
Dr. Phillips, JDIP is already an infrastructure program employing people and contributing to GDP as well. What then is the net benefit of reallocating rather, a quarter of JDIP money to the GEEP program?
Well, the question is not that it is not providing benefit, but how much benefit are we getting? There are some critical areas that we need to consider. For example, the contracts would need to be renegotiated in any event. When you consider that by the stroke of a pen, the profit margin was moved up from 20 to 25%, that represents the annual salary of more than 1,000 teachers. We can get more benefit from that program. And we believe that without sacrificing any of the work now going on, we can get more by addressing critical infrastructure that would provide for labor-intensive employment, and we wouldn't lose anything at all. For example, understand that this labor-intensive employment on your gullies and your drainage systems is vitally important, as recognized by the World Bank, the IDB, and others, if we are to be able to overcome the weather-related disasters that have set us back so much in the past. We think we can both have the programs and the road work that is now in place, even though it has selected on a very poor basis, and we can get additional work which generates labor employment.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. I now turn to Mr. Al Edwards to pose a question to Mr. Shaw. I'm sorry, the rebuttal.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
The Jamaica Development Infrastructure Program is a program that is geared for the rehabilitation of roads island-wide, roads, bridges island-wide. It is a program that has been designed, it's a contract to do this. And for the opposition to suggest that you can arbitrarily go and disturb that contract in order to accommodate a crash program called the GEEP is absolute talk about unprogrammed expenditures. This would be absolutely fiscally irresponsible on the part of any government to touch the JDIP program in that way. It is being reviewed now, and let's see the results of that forensic study.
Mr. Berbick wants to use one of his two follow-ups.
Right, thank you. Dr. Phillips, how sustainable is the GEEP program, though, given the types of projects that are involved, and how soon would you expect to start creating long-term employment? How many? And over what period?
There is no choice between long-term employment and emergency employment. When you ask about sustainability, we are not expecting the emergency program to last in perpetuity. It is a short-term measure to bring some hope to people now. We believe it can be done, and let me add that we are not intending to unilaterally abrogate anything. We will renegotiate the program with the Chinese lenders.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Mr. Shaw, your rebuttal.
I don't think
there's a follow-up question, so you have 30 seconds to rebut.
Well, the issue is, once again, that the program is for roads. You don't take that program and go to do gullies or to bush road bank or to do crash program work. The GEEP has clearly not been properly designed. And in desperation, in order to meet the needs of a published manifesto, you turn to JDIP to fund it.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. And now I turn to Mr. Al Edwards to pose a question to Mr. Shaw.
Good evening, Minister. Over the last 30 years, annual gross domestic product growth has been less than 1%. Last week on Garfield Bertha's direct program on CVM, you predicted economic growth of between 3 to 5%. Isn't that a tad bit optimistic, Minister, And how do you intend to achieve this despite the threat of a double-dip recession in the world economy and the country facing a tight IMF arrangement?
Admittedly, the double dip, inflation, and the crisis that appears to be emerging will militate against that ambitious target. But I really want to say to the people of Jamaica that under the Jamaica Labour Party government in the 1960s, the economy grew by 6% per year. In the 1980s, after we went into negative growth under the PNP in the 70s, we rebuilt the economy once again to 6% growth again over a 5-year period going into the PNP administration. The issue is that when you talk, Mr. Edwards, about that 1% average, that 1% average comes about because of the mismanagement of the PNP administration, that every time we build the economy up to 6% growth, they bring it back down into 1% and negative growth, and you end up with this negative position. And so even as we have the challenge that faces us now with the emerging crisis, we have to continue on a sure-footed path to carry out those structural reforms to which we are already committed and which will form the basis for building a sustainable and a competitive economy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shaw. Dr. Phillips?
There are some simple facts which should not be ignored. The fact is that in 2007, the economy was growing. The last full year of the PNP, 2006-2007, the economy was growing at 3.2%. The fact is also that the economy in 2007 was 41% larger than it was in 1989. It is also a fact that today the economy is 5% smaller than it was in 2007. Those things cannot be ignored away, and no amount of words will change that basic reality. The administration of the Jamaica Labour Party has failed to manage the crisis well.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. There is a follow-up question from Mr. Edwards.
Minister Shaw, back in 2008, you said the world financial crisis would have very little impact on us as a country. In hindsight, were you wrong? And what measures must we now take to brace ourselves against the buffeting winds of a declining world economy?
As Minister of Finance, I could not have gone into the theater and cried fire. I have to calm things with my voice in what I say. But what is important is not what I said then, it was my action that was taken since then, which has led to a level of stability in this economy that we have not seen for 30 years. All of the critical macroeconomic indicators are lined up in the right direction.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. Dr. Phillips.
You know, it's interesting. He says he could not cry fire. It seems to me as if he was a fireman who is now appearing having started the fire before. What has happened is that for 2 years, the Jamaica Labour Party allowed interest rates to climb. They spent, pushed the deficit up, and that made Jamaica unable to face the crisis. Now they come and tell us that they have made it stable. It's not true. Can't compute.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. Mr. Damian Mitchell to Dr. Phillips.
Dr. Phillips, what new approach would your government take to cut out corruption, which resulted in millions of dollars of losses under the PNP government?
The first task is to ensure that there is effective parliamentary oversight. That was sadly missing in the JDIP, and indeed I don't know how any Minister of Finance could have countenanced such a major project being taken off the budget. There are parliamentary committees that have been set up, the PAAC, by this administration, but they need to make it work. And in addition, we need to strengthen the capacity of the Office of the Contractor General. We need to unite it with the Corruption Prevention Commission and the Parliamentary Integrity Commission. We need to give it the necessary investigative powers, and we need to give them powers to recommend prosecutions.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips. There's a rebuttal first,
yes.
And then he's wanting to follow up. But
Yes, let me make the point. Let me make the point, first of all, that the JDIP is in the budget, in the public body's book with the Road Maintenance Fund. And secondly, the issue of the review by Parliament. It is the Jamaica Labour Party government that has not only made the PAAC work, that's the Administration and Appropriations Committee, but to make it work, we put it under the chairmanship of a member of the opposition. That's a commitment to transparency. So, Dr. Phillips, if it ain't working, that's your fault.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. There's a follow-up to the question.
Dr. Phillips, some of the initiatives you mentioned are already in train. What new would you implement?
No, they came to the Parliament and, in fact, did not pass through the Parliament. We are committing that our majority will ensure the passage of that legislation and that we will, in fact, implement the terms of the legislation and, in fact, revise it, because there is nothing now in place that brings the Contractor General into a united arrangement with the other Corruption Prevention Commission and Parliament.
Thank you, Dr. Phillips.
Commission.
Mr. Shaw?
I'm in agreement with the need for that legislation to be implemented. But the truth is that, we have to have the transparency that we speak about. We have put in place the systems and structures. Everything can't wait on the Contractor General. Everything can't wait on the Auditor General. The issue is that the Public Appropriations Committee and the Public Accounts Committee must do their work.
Thank
That's
you.
what I did when I was chairman of the PAC.
Thank you, Mr. Shaw. We're now going to take a short break and invite you to stay tuned. Don't even think of going away.
The smiles on their faces mean more than just happiness. Since 2002, the JPS Early Childhood Nutrition Program has been supporting thousands of children across the island. The program now feeds 30,000 basic school students every day. With good nourishment, they're eager and able to learn. The JPS has links to communities that go well beyond wires and poles. Here, with a little help from JPS, early childhood students are getting a chance to shine.
Now this one is called All About the Music.
Fulfilling hopes, creating dreams, and making a difference are at the heart of the Daniel Geddes Foundation. Through our Diageo Learning for Life skills training programs, over 1,800 Jamaicans now have a real chance of contributing to Jamaica's economic growth.
Upon being accepted, we learn a lot of things. Before, I thought I was just going to come and mix up some drinks and flip some bottles and stuff. But before we got to that, the meat of the matter, I learned personal development, working with colleagues and customers, communicating on the telephone instead of saying, hello, who is this?
Certified as bartenders, drapery makers, plumbers, tilers, waiters, housekeepers, customer service agents, and landscapers, Diageo Learning for Life graduates are empowered, competent, and able to give back to their families, communities, and Jamaica. The Daniel Geddes Foundation, here for Jamaicans, here for Jamaica.
It's all about the music.
Have you collected your voter ID card? If your name is on the voters list and you have not yet collected your voter ID card, please do so now. ID cards for electors on the voters list are available for collection at your EOJ constituency office. Your ID card makes it easier for you to vote. You will still be allowed to vote without your voter ID card, but you must be fingerprinted and sworn and undergo a lengthy verification process. For more information, call toll-free 1-888-991-8683. You may also visit www.ecj.com.jm.
In a perilous economic environment, businesses need every advantage they can get. The Mona School of Business MBA programs, accredited by the Association of MBAs, equip your staff to give your business the competitive edge. MSB graduates learn the skills to critically analyze and solve problems. We produce transformational leaders to reshape the fortunes of the Caribbean region. MSB provides globally relevant, real-world expertise from a uniquely Caribbean perspective. The University of the West Indies Mona